with Justin, a leader of tomorrow, and you're also going to attend a discussion on the plenary about energy security.
That's correct.
And energy policy.
Yes.
So, looking at the nuclear disaster in Japan, that has made policymakers all around the world again aware of our high-risk, high-return approach towards energy generation. What do you think? To what extent do you expect a permanent shift towards a less risky but also more costly energy generation?
Well, I think that one of the main issues is that one of the main drivers behind the push for development of nuclear energy for power generation was to decarbonize our economies. So climate change was one of the major factors behind that. And then a secondary goal was, of course, energy independence, because in the EU there was a fear of Russian dominance in terms of energy imports. At least in the US there was a fear of importing energy from unstable regions. So that was one of the main drivers, although in the wake of Fukushima now, the risks of incorporating nuclear energy as a stable source of so-called energy which is not going to emit carbon has now been questioned. But as of yet, there really hasn't been a major step back in terms of investment in nuclear energy, but there's been more of a reassessment. So what I see for the future is that the safeguards are going to be developed much more robustly. There's going to be many more reviews in terms of whether certain nuclear plants are sitting on certain sensitive areas such as fault lines or what have you. And of course, I think that the public as a whole is going to place pressure on their national policymakers to not incorporate nuclear energy. So I think that it will have an impact, but I think that the impact is not going to be as great as what occurred after Chernobyl, for instance. So I think that we're going to see perhaps a slight pullback, but we're not going to see the full turnaround that we saw after Chernobyl.
Particularly emerging countries face a dilemma when it comes to energy security and sustainable energy generation. And in your opinion, how can they manage? I mean, let's assume they grow at 9% or 10%.
Yes.
How can they manage to really substantially invest in sustainable energy generation without harming the growth prospects?
Yes, well, that is a difficult prospect, because when we look at countries such as China or India, which have extremely high growth rates, they are obsessed with energy security. I mean, so the major goal that they are looking at is not necessarily having clean energy, but it's more having secure energy supplies. So as you see within China, they're building coal plants right now, because that is one of the easiest ways in order to meet their robust energy demand. So they aren't really that concerned with environmental issues as of yet, such as the Western countries are, but there is an increasing focus. But I think that as long as renewable energy development is cost competitive, so for instance, if you can develop solar energy or any other types of renewable energy sources that are cost competitive, that will not harm their economic development, then I think that they would be extremely happy to switch over to those energy sources. But I think when push comes to shove, when they have a choice either between incorporating renewable energy on one hand, but it's slightly more expensive, or having traditional hydrocarbon energy sources that will, of course, emit much more carbon, they will choose the latter choice, simply because economic development is key for them at the moment.
Is that justified?
Is it justified? Well, the thing is, they look at it historically. They say that when you look at the U.S., when you look at Britain during their industrialization, they had smog storms or smog days, for instance, where you couldn't even walk outside without nearly choking. So they look at it as the West was able, or the industrialized countries were able to develop using whatever energy sources they wanted, extremely dirty energy sources. Remember the coal or the smoke belching stacks from the Dixonian England, for instance, if you read Charles Dickens. But in terms of the Chinese and Indians and so on, they say, well, the West, they had their time to develop, and we need our time to develop as well. And then once you reach a certain standard, then we'll be able to concentrate on much more in their view, abstract concerns of the environment and so on. But they're trying to find jobs for 500 million people, for instance, for hundreds of millions of people. I mean, so for them, this is a national security issue, really finding jobs for people and ensuring domestic stability. And then more environmental concerns come a bit later.
So particularly in Europe or in the Western world, traditional, as you say, traditional energy production regains prominence in public debates. Do you believe in a sustainable revival of those energy production methods?
In terms of hydrocarbon sources of energy?
For instance, in Europe, coal production, or particularly gas.
Well, there are several contrasting, let's say, drivers that are operating within the EU at the moment. On one hand, there's energy diversification, which is in order to remove European dependence on Russian natural gas. So this is an enormous driver. And then on the other hand, we also have 20-20-20. So for instance, the European Union, they want to develop 20% of their energy by 2020 from renewable energy sources. So we have some contrasting aims. So you can have energy security if you produce most of your energy by domestically produced coal, for instance. Okay, but at the same time, there are these climate drivers which obligates the European Union to either utilize natural gas, which can serve as a bridge fuel, or to utilize nuclear energy. So there are some contrasting aims at the moment, but I think that Europe is not really going to go back to traditional energy sources such as coal, simply because within Europe the green movement is extremely strong, and it's much stronger. The environmental movement here is much stronger than it is in the U.S. I mean, so the public is not going to accept extremely large, let's say, return or a quick return to coal energy or to coal and other dirty energy sources. So I don't see that, but I do see perhaps not such a quick movement away from nuclear energy. So I think nuclear energy is going to be very important still in the future, and I think also there's going to be much more of a transition towards natural gas, although attempting to get natural gas from the Middle East, so from Qatar, from Algeria, or what have you, as opposed to importing it from Russia. And then also there might be renewed focus on desert tech, so attempting to utilize the broad desert expanses in northern Africa as a means to produce solar energy, and then exporting this energy exporting this electricity to Europe in order to help Europe remove itself from dirty fuel sources.
So, as a future leader, and you're likely going to be one, you already have or you will have a lot of power. What are you going to do with it?
Well, I think that's an interesting question because we were speaking about this yesterday during one of the first sessions. And for me, actually, power in itself is inherently biased. Even if people come to power with the notion of doing some very beneficial acts for people or for humanity or so on, but inherently an overabundance of power is essentially unstable. So actually, you want to have a decentralized type of power. So even when you look at laws with financial institutions within Europe, they're against having a type of monopoly status. So even Microsoft has had, or Google is having problems within the European Union because the idea of having too much power within itself, even if the power is a bit innocuous or it's not, it doesn't necessarily have bad intent, but still power itself, an overabundance of it is viewed as being a bit destabilizing. So with my power, what I would attempt to do is to empower others, because I don't necessarily want an overabundance of power within myself, because I'm only a human. I'm a human being, I make mistakes and so on. But what I'd like to do is to empower those who can also make decisions and help me make decisions as well. So empowerment of others, and that way I think it would be much more stable, and we can actually help arrive at a situation whereby we can help humanity together.
Now you've been at the symposium, I mean it starts tomorrow, but you've been already here in the pre-program for the students. Can you describe your first impressions with 3 words? What would you say? 3 adjectives.
Energetic, ambitious, and thoughtful.
Great. Thanks very much,
Great,
Justin.
thank you.
Have a good time at the symposium.
Appreciate it.